adapt that into meeting as well. Good afternoon, councillors, those here in attendance and anybody who might be tuning in, whether it's now or a little bit later on. It's great to be meeting here for our ordinary meeting and acknowledging that we do meet on the unceded lands of the Palawa people, the original ongoing owners of Launceston, the Kalamaluka, where the three rivers meet. So it's great to be here today. Good energy, good buzz. We do have a couple of apologies, Councillor McMahon, Councillor Gibson and Councillor Pentridge. Please be seated. Moving through agenda item number 2, mayoral acknowledgements. We've got 3 declarations of interest. A councillor must declare any interest that a councillor may have in a matter before the discussion on that matter commences. Do I have any declarations of interest? Nope, there being none, we'll move forward to confirmation of minutes at 4.1. Recommendation is that the minutes of the ordinary meeting at the City of Launceston held on the 8th of August be confirmed as true and correct record. Somebody to move? Councillor Britton, seconded by Councillor Harris. All those in favour? That's all councillors present. The motion is carried. At 5, we have council workshops. 5.1 is the council workshop report, 8th of August to the 15th of August. We have here the recommendation that council notes the council workshops conducted and attendance since the last meeting for these purposes described: monofoma, future direction, public electric vehicle charges, University of Tasmania update, residential parking policy, road reserves, parks and public reserve occupation policy guidelines and fee capping, the lease at the Albert Hall Cafe Gorge Restaurant and Cafe, Albert Hall booking arrangements. Somebody to move the workshops. Councillor Dawkins. A seconder. Councillor Harris. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. Just to touch on the residential parking policy discussion that we had, how relevance to a notice motion coming forward today from your good self, Mayor. I think it's really important to keep that in mind when we're having that conversation, as it's entirely relevant.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Dawkins. Any further speakers to the workshops conducted? Nothing as the seconder, Councillor Harris. Anything further to close? Okay, putting it to the vote then. All of those in favour? It's all councillors present. The motion is carried. We have no leave or reports that have been identified as a part of this agenda at 6 and 7. So moving to 8, which is public question time. 8.1, we have the public questions as published in this agenda. Now, any of those public questions on notice that has not been answered in a part of this agenda has been circulated to the elected representatives. Moving forward to 8.2, which is public questions without notice, noting that the rules and regulations, they are displayed and available upon entry. You may ask a total of 3 questions each. Public questions without notice. Thank you, Mr. Ginnon.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Ian Ginnon, 20 Pine Avenue, Newstead. 2016, 2022, 2 memorable years in Launceston for the floods. I understand the people on the flood levy in 2016 got about 4 or 5 inches of going over. I know at Newstead in 2016 and 22 on the netball courts, it went over the, went over the courts and we're just about to go into Newstead. If you get a glass of water and fill it, I did want to do a demonstration, and put a stone in it, it will overflow. So I was really perturbed when I saw thousands of tonnes of earth and fuel put in a floodplain not too far from here. That's a Kilafatti. And I'm really concerned that Council has allowed this. Simply, as I said, with the glass and the stone in the water, instead of being 4 inches short of the levee, it will cause it to go over. And certainly at Newstead, with the amount of fuel put in there, will have a direct effect to those residents there. Secondly, the Tamar River is filling up with silt. And again, when you've got an active floodplain like that, filled with loose fill, lots of that will end up in the Tamar River. So the question is, why has Council allowed it? And what precautions has Council put in place to prevent additional flooding and the silt from going down the Tamar River.
Thank you, Mr. Ginner. Thank you for the question. I'll just defer this to the CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your question. I'm certainly aware of the matter of the last couple of days that Councillor Britton has actually raised this with our infrastructure department. Unfortunately, our General Manager of Infrastructure and Assets is away sick today, so I'd prefer to take that on notice if I can, and then we can actually come back with some technical information and publish it in the next.
Second question. I raised with Councillor Britton, and he's brought to your attention. My concern is it's been going on for 6 months or more. Why is council allowed for that amount of time? There are trucks, semi-trailers, down going through Newstead on a daily basis, numbers of them. This is 30 acres of land to 2 metres in height. It's equivalent to a couple of Sydney harbours.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ginner. And as the CEO stated, we'll take that on notice and have a report done and answered in that questions there. Thank you. Further questions without notice? Okay, there being none, we will move forward through petitions and deputations. As there are no items identified as a part of this, we'll go to 11, which is Planning Authority. Under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act of 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to items included in Agenda Item 11, Planning Authority. 11.1 is 22 Stone Street, West Launceston, residential construction of an additional dwelling and an additional crossover. Before I get to the recommendation, we have some noted speakers, starting with Mr. Walker.
George Walker, planning consultant with 60 Degrees, Suite 103, 287 Charles Street, Launceston. We're the applicants for 22 Stone Street. Dear Mayor and Councillors, the planning application before you for a second dwelling at 22 Stone Street, West Launceston is a superb planning outcome for the city. It represents infill development and consolidation of an existing urban growth area, which is a key priority of the Northern Tasmanian Regional Land Use Strategy. It makes efficient use of land for housing. It optimises the use of existing infrastructure services, and it provides a different dwelling type within the area that will contribute an additional housing option within the city. The key planning scheme discretion associated with the proposed second dwelling relates to the setback from the Frederick Street frontage of the site, which is the secondary frontage. In this regard, the applicable acceptable solution requires the second dwelling to be set back 3 metres from Frederick Street. The proposed setback is 2 metres. Unlike most performance criteria, this performance criteria for the dwelling frontage setback provides a relatively distinguishable test. It simply requires the proposed setback to be compatible with streetscape, having regard to topographical constraints. In this instance, the streetscape is measured by definition of 100 metres from the eastern and western boundaries of the site along Frederick Street. Within the streetscape, 6 buildings have been identified to have a frontage setback less than 3 metres, with the lowest setback being 0 metres at 77 Frederick Street, and the maximum setback being 2.5 metres at 85 Frederick Street. There's a diagram on page 56 of the attachment to the agenda which illustrates the setbacks within the streetscape. Due to the topography of the site and the broader West Launceston area, it's extremely common for buildings that are located on the upper side of roads to have a larger apparent scale, mass and bulk compared to buildings located on the lower side, in comparison to those lower areas and also in flatter areas of Launceston. Got one more point. The siting and scale of the proposed second dwelling therefore provides reasonably consistent separation between dwellings and their frontage within the streetscape, satisfying the requirements of the planning scheme. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Were there further speakers to agenda item 11.1? Okay, there being none, we will move forward. Oh, no, thank you, no, thank you. Councillor Britton might just help with
Helen
the...
Tate, 67 Burke Street. Can you hear that?
Yes, yeah, great, thank you.
So, Mayor and councillors, look, whether this place is heritage listed or not, Stone Street stands as a significant, intact historical precinct, quite different to what the other person has presented. It's important in itself It's important to the immediate residents. It's important to all the residents of Launceston. And Mr Mayor, the image that we so prominently promote is that of an intact heritage city. The city is valued for that by visitors and residents alike. My representation refers to, sorry, too many things here. The disruption to the visual qualities of the precinct, disruption to an intact historical character and precinct. It impacts immediately the enjoyment for residents close by in the surrounding suburbs and the pedestrian foot wandering tourists. People make use of this space. The building impacts adversely on the amenity of the residents of both Stone Street and Frederick Street. It significantly reduces outlook and it significantly changes the streetscape character of both Frederick Street and Stone Street. My representation too was an intuitive one. It seemed something was very wrong here. And when I saw the ratepayers' submission, I thought, yes, that's the words of an experienced historian, experienced planner, and it said exactly what I want to say in the right words. So I refer you all to the Ratepayers Association as part of my representation. I do not support that all performance criteria and acceptable solutions are met. Okay. Yes, we love this, but oh gosh, already.
This is a separate representation now as well. So, speaking on behalf of two people, I'll allow you to continue to speak.
Thank you. So, this building's unlike any other in the area. It turns its back on us. It overshadows this space and it makes it slippery and dangerous to walk on. I'm saying that it is beholden on planners and councillors to make that public space of Frederick Street still work for us. No, sorry, wrong word there. I'm saying it's beholden on the planners and the councillors to make our planning scheme work for us in achieving the best outcomes and the best benefits we can for the most of us. This one is a discretionary situation, so it is even more so your duty of care to the citizens that the city and the citizens be honoured. I refer to there's so often such an insignificant concern for amenity and livability, but it's in the planning scheme, and as has just been shown through the Supreme Court, those issues are important and they're too often dismissed. So I would say at the very, very, very least, if you wish to pass this DA, then impose conditions that maintain the standard setbacks from both the frontage on Stone Street and disputably that significant frontage on Frederick Street. And then the applicant may be able to fulfil the purpose for which he asked for this land in the first place, which was an extended garden. A vote for this DA perpetuates that hoax that's represented in the first instance. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Okay, we'll move to the recommendation that a permit be granted for residential construction of an additional dwelling and an additional crossover at 22 Stone Street, West Launceston, subject to the provided conditions. Somebody to move. Deputy Mayor to move to start the debate. Seconder, Councillor Harris. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you for both the speakers who have spoken today and have read the representations and have had a discussion with one or two of the representors in the process of making my decision, which I haven't as yet. I want to start out just by a preamble. I guess that from my perspective, we're in this situation because we sold a block of land to an state government sold a block of land for a purpose for which it's now not being used for. That disappoints me that that's happened, and we're now in a situation of having to make a decision in regards to that. But so be it. The reality of it is we are faced with a situation where somebody's put a development application to us. It's also worthy of note that we've refused a similar application 4 months ago, 5, 6 months ago, in regards to a similar development on the same block of land. on the basis that it was going to be a standalone subdivided block of land. And now we're dealing with a multiple dwelling application, which then changes the rules for assessment. So I guess from a person looking in from the outside and saying, well, if it wasn't good enough then, why is it good enough now? And I have some sympathy for that view as well. But I do also understand, as I always do, in regards to the fact that we are operating as a planning scheme and therefore we need to follow the rules that the planning scheme sets out. There are some performance criteria that need to be met and under the discretion, which is general residential zone P1 and P3 setbacks and building envelope for all dwellings. General residential 8.4.6 general residential zone P1 and P2 privacy for all dwellings. 8.4.8 general residential zone P1 8.4.8 waste storage and multiple dwellings, and there are 2 in relation to car parking codes. So looking at those on an individual basis, I guess we look at the setbacks, and in both cases the standard setbacks on the frontage, which is deemed to be the smaller frontage, which is on Stone Street, is the general setback is 4.5. As the speaker said earlier, and our officers have reported to us, that setback is somewhat less than that. But you then need to take it into context in the performance criteria about what the rest of the streetscape looks like. And as a consequence of that, when you look at that, most of the frontages along Stone Street actually fit within less than 4.5 metres, and therefore the performance criteria, because it's not out of place, meet the standard. Frederick Street, I think again, is slightly imposed in regards to which is a second frontage, I think is meant to be 3 metres separation, and it's 2.5, I think. But anyway, something smaller than the 3 metres that's required. I think the difference between that and a normal residential where you're building right next door to your neighbour and you're building outside the building envelope, and the overshadowing, which is the large part of the reasons for the setbacks, is the overshadowing and amenity next door, is that the amenity is actually a road that sits next to it. I do take on point, though, a conversation I had with one of the representatives yesterday, that some of the amenity actually relates to the pathway. The people walk down, they walk past that house, and previously you were walking in sunshine. Now, at certain times during the day, you're going to have overshadowing on the basis of the building, overshadowing the footpath, and it does make it slippery. So therefore, one might argue the amenity of the public using the space is something that we should consider. I think that in general, I've always had difficulty with what the word amenity means, but over my time here over the last 13 to 14 years, it's really about its reference point to other people as far as overshadowing from sunlight into habitable rooms. The view is not part of an amenity. That's not something that we control or own. Therefore, as a consequence of that, I've always thought if I had somebody build something in front of me, my amenity is adversely impacted by that. But under the way I think that the planning rules work and the way that I think it's been tested over many years in tribunals and others, the amenity doesn't go that far in regards to it. I guess the other comment was made in regards to the actual precinct that we operate in, and if this was a heritage precinct, maybe the rules would be different. The reality of it is Paul Davies, in his report back in 2007, said this is a beautiful heritage area, which he did with a number of places in and around Launceston, and I've known houses that are now not there because they weren't registered on the heritage register, either locally or on the Tasmanian register. This is still a beautiful heritage area, and I think West Launceston is one of our really significant areas of heritage. The question is, does that mean a modern building can't be placed in there? The answer is no, it can't. No, it doesn't. So therefore, the ability to put a modern house in there, and I think there has been some work on the look of the house since the last submission to us. I do have a little bit more to say. Yes, please.
Okay. Deputy Mayor would like an extension. Somebody to move. Councillor Harris, seconded by Councillor Britton. All of those in favour? That's all councillors present. Please continue, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, so yes, it's a beautiful heritage area, and will this house detract from that? The answer is to some people, yes, it will, because it's not a total heritage listed area any longer because there's a modern building in there. I think that the softening of the building renders by going into a weatherboard. I don't think building a faux heritage building cuts the mustard with many people these days, and making something that's distinct and itself and actually operates well in and around the housing around them is something that we should be looking to ensure that happens. And I think that since the first renders that we got back in December last year to the renders we now have, there have been some changes in relation to that, and as a consequence of that, we've actually softened the Frederick Street montage. And I guess the other part of it was the private open space, which has now been carefully butted into the garden of the previous house. So therefore, I guess that the private open space aspects, which were of concern back in December, are now no longer, because there is sufficient private open space. Whilst I note some of the representatives have said it's a very difficult private open space and that you've got to go up a set of stairs to get into it, and it's encompassed in the block of land of the other part of 22 Stone Street. The fact that it is a multiple dwelling means that it can go anywhere on that space and everybody can be happy with it, provided it doesn't happen. Somebody's surmised that we may end up with a stratum title that comes out of this. We may well have to deal with that in due course, but we'll have to deal with that in the context that 25 metres of open space is actually part of that building. So therefore it will need to be changed. But I guess, my concern is we started with a situation where we refused it. It's now not substantially different, albeit different, and we're now recommending for approval. I'm still of a mind that as I read through the technicalities of the scheme as best I can, and relying on the professional advice that we've been received from our officers, that this is still something that we probably are going to need to approve today, but I'm interested to hear another councillor's views.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Harris is the seconder.
Thank you, Mayor. I might start with a few questions if I can. The first question is in regard, when we're assessing this under the multiple dwelling rather than a subdivision, what are the main differences that we are then assessing this under? We've heard about these private open space now being added to it. Are there any other significant changes that the assessment as a multiple dwelling as distinct to the subdivision?
It's a completely different assessment. So the subdivision provisions in the scheme are relatively simple. They talk about access, lot size and services, essentially. The multiple dwelling assessment is a much more comprehensive assessment that talks about, because you are proposing a building, so with subdivision there are no built form standards. So it's an integrated assessment. Essentially, you are required to show how the building fits on the lot with the other building, how you assess the setbacks and how the building itself functions. So there's a lot more standards in the multiple dwelling provisions than there are in the subdivision standards. The subdivision standards, particularly on lot size, it is predicated on there being a bigger minimum lot size for subdivision, and that's a more conservative approach, because once you subdivide, there's a no permit required ability to put the house on there, so it tends to be more conservative, whereas because of the complexity or the increased level of assessment for multiple dwellings, it presumes that you can potentially come in a little bit tighter, and it also presumes shared services and shared driveways, etc., which generally reduces the amount of land you need for two dwellings. So does that answer your question? It's like comparing apples with oranges, really. There's no, the standards are just a different standards.
Thank you. I think that helps. It does talk about with the numbering of the lots, shall we say, into strata 1 and 2 in the development application. Is that something that is now meaning this is a strata, or is that simply being used for convention so you can number the two houses 1 and 2?
Yeah, that's generally a convention. There's no compulsion to strata, but it tends to be, as you know, that's a note. So if it's proposed to be strata, then those would be the addresses. Okay. But there's no necessity to strata. If this second dwelling was built, they could be occupied by one family or rented out with no requirement to separate them.
Okay. So now we have two multiple dwellings. We'll fast forward a bit into the future, developed on the one block or the one lot, and then they then decide to sell one of the two off. What are the options available? Is it able to be subdivided because it is now an existing house, and so therefore have they bypassed the subdivision rules, or would they be able to even strata title it and sell it off, perhaps by then coming back to the council?
So the strata title process is procedural. So there are certain requirements you have to meet in the Act, but if you do that, there's an implied approval in approving this multiple dwelling. They don't come back for a council decision. The subdivision requires a planning permit. So depending on what's proposed, a subdivision could be applied for in the future, and that would be assessed at the time under the provisions of the scheme that applied at the time.
Okay, so one requires us to consider it, the other is just as you say, a pre-approval almost granted as a strata title if you meet certain conditions. What are the differences between the two in the case of formed houses? Is there much?
Well, the strata title process, the approval relies on you complying with a planning permit. So if you've got a planning permit for two houses, which shows how everything works, and you comply with that in your strata, you get the tick. That's essentially how the strata works.
So they wouldn't be able to remove the public open space from the second building, for example, that would have to stay?
That would, in order to get a strata based on this approval, it would have to comply with this spatial arrangement of buildings and open space in this approval.
Yep.
In a future subdivision, it's hard to speculate what may be applied for. They could apply for the boundary in this or some other arrangement, and that would be assessed in the normal way that a planning permit would be assessed. Yeah, I mean, council have assessed it once and have not approved it, so yeah.
If it was likely to come back, it may be not approved again. Well, having said it, it's in a building that exists,
correct,
and we can then go and look at it. So it does.
The circumstances, the assessment will be dependent on the circumstances and the planning provisions in place at the time an application's made.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I guess the other thing I'd perhaps just like your attention or your input on, to me, the difference between the proposed here and what we knocked back before was the integration of weatherboard and surrounding the balcony to, if you like, lower the effect, because it seemed very much at the time before it was an overhanging, overlooking. It's still sitting in exactly the same place, but the weatherboards have been wrapped all around the bottom of the balcony and also the sides of the property. Is that weatherboard consistent with what else is in the street? And if you were, not that this is an historic precinct, as Councillor Mackenzie said, would that help in integrating it into what's there as existing, the use of the weatherboard?
The assessment at the moment isn't necessarily concerning itself with materiality, but from a first principles point of view, weatherboard is a more prevalent material in the West Launceston precinct. So from that perspective, although this design is not intended to be replicating the designs in the area, the choice of weatherboards is more consistent. I think previously it was an open post thing with visible underneath the house, which yes. I think, without necessarily going into it's not necessarily relevant to the assessment, but from a design perspective, the closed-in veranda with weatherboards is a more compatible design response.
I would agree with that, certainly. As far as speaking to this motion now, thank you for that, Mr. Jamieson. This is the second time we've had this back before us within the year. As the Deputy Mayor has said, and also Mr. Jamieson, whilst it is a refined design, and it still sits on roughly the same footprint, I think, it does impose itself still, but fits more harmoniously in Stone Street. this type of development will become more relevant as people look to continue to meet the desire for inner city housing, and certainly opportunities of pieces of land, whether the house sits down the block rather than across it or otherwise. We'll see more of this coming forward in the future. And I guess it's a difficult situation for us to then determine whether this should be approved or not approved. But that's what we're paid to do. And looking at the officers' advice who have recommended approval, I will be somewhat begrudgingly approving it today, or voting for that, because I do feel that it meets what the planning scheme intends us to do. I do also feel that it has somewhat bypassed the subdivision process, but under the strata title process, they will be able to achieve their ultimate aim of perhaps having 2 properties and being able to sell one of those off at a future time. But nevertheless, I think today, as by the officer recommendation, I'll go with that today. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Further speakers? Councillor Kai. Oh, and then a question from Councillor Walker.
Did you want to do questions first? No? Okay. Well, thank you to our 2 speakers for coming in and share your views today. I will not be supporting the recommendation to approve this development application, and my reasons are, firstly, the original purpose of this strip of land was for additional outdoor space for the current residents, not to squeeze a building into a space that it barely fits. Secondly, there has been very little change from the DA that was last presented to this table, and it was unanimously voted for refusal. Lastly, the planning scheme. This development relies mostly on performance criteria in the planning scheme, as it does not meet the acceptable solutions. And my understanding is that performance criteria are based on interpretation. So according to 8.4.2 of setbacks and building envelopes for all dwellings, this proposed development does not meet the planning scheme, and it does not fit within the building envelope. 3 of the boundary setbacks do not comply. The eastern primary frontage requires a 4.5 setback, but the proposed is only 2 metres. The southern frontage requires 3 metres setback, and again, will only be 2 metres. And other parts of this development that does not meet the acceptable solution and relies on the performance criteria are 8.4.8, waste storage for multiple dwellings, C2.6.3, number of accesses for vehicles, and also C2.5.1, car parking numbers. The proposed parking space intrudes outside of the title area and again relies on performance criteria. If this was presented to the tribunal, would the TASCAP panel rule in favour of the planning officer's interpretation of all these performance criteria? 1 or 2 maybe, but all unlikely, and the tribunal only needs 1 ground to overturn an approval. In addition, this building is most definitely going to have a huge impact on the streetscape in an area where heritage values are significant. So with that, I will not be supporting the planning officer's recommendation to approve this development application, and I urge my fellow councillors to look deeper into this DA and do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kai. A question, Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. A series of questions, if I may, and I will just start with, it didn't occur to me that, yes, I suppose the driveway does protrude outside the land boundary. If someone was to park there rather than put their car in the garage, they'd be parking half on the footpath, half within their boundary. Would that be a legal way to park in that situation?
So I think what I'd like to do there is refer you to the condition number 2 and point B in condition number 2 proposed, and I can read that. It says, prior to the commencement of any work, amended plans must be submitted to the satisfaction of the council to replace the plans annotated. and I'm paraphrasing, the amended plans must show removal of the guest parking from the parking and turning plan. So yeah, there's no approval for that. That was shown on the plan, but we'll remove that by condition.
So it would not be legal to park there, like it's not legal for me to park across my footpath, the same as anyone else, but nonetheless, it would appear that it would be inviting to park there, especially if you are a visitor. You're not going to go into the garage. You may park on that driveway illegally, I suppose, is the paraphrase there. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't think that would be our analysis. If you choose to park illegally, then you are liable for the consequences of that. It's not something that we've assessed or approved.
Thank you. My first question does go to the 3D imagery, and I did think myself that some of the imagery in the advertised plans, as one representative pointed out, would appear to be a bit misleading. We have a 7 metre high south-eastern corner of the building, and there are images that, might be a wide-angle type of perspective or something like that. Is that reason for a DA to be re-advertised? Would that be considered, misleading or confusing to that point? I might not be able to put my hands exactly on that image at the moment, but I did have to query myself when I looked at a few of the renderings, because I thought, I'm sure it should look a bit taller than that. Is that reason for DA to be, questioned?
So the application has scaled drawings. So the assessment is done on scale drawings. The perspectives, I've not necessarily, they didn't jump out as me as being misleading or to the planner, but we haven't considered that point, to be honest. But the assessment is done on the scaled plans. I mean, there are always issues with perspectives and montages and the way these things are drawn, but generally speaking, it was our understanding that they fairly represented the development within reason. But the assessment, I want to make it clear that the assessment's done on the scale plans.
Yes, and I would accept that too. There are, other ways that including myself, who did go to that particular corner and found that yes, it is, nearly 7 metres in that particular corner. When this application first came to us as a subdivision, it would have had a different building envelope, one that it adhered to more closely. I don't think it was inside the envelope either, but this time around the envelope is for the entire site. That is correct?
There are some provisions that work on the entire site, that's right. I mean, setbacks to individual boundaries may be the same, but there are provisions that relate to the entire site. For example, like dwelling density. So in a subdivision, if there's 2 titles, there are some provisions that work on per title. So inevitably you get the benefit of that with the multiple dwelling title.
And this proposed development sits well outside the building envelope and therefore relies on other assessments, performance criteria. Apart from the boundary provisions, how do we justify 8.4.2? Let me just find it now. There's just so many different sort of strings here going on. P3, the siting and scale of a dwelling must. Part 4, not cause unreasonable loss of amenity to adjoining properties, having regard to point 4, visual impacts caused by the apparent scale, bulk or proportions of the dwelling. So this dwelling, I suppose the point I'm trying to make is it's outside the building envelope. it has bulk and scale on that side of the property as a result of that, up to a 7 metre or 6.94 metre height, which is not something that you would necessarily see from a road front normally. It might be at the back of a house. Sometimes it's at the front of the house. I'll accept that. But in this case, we're looking at a new application to be approved. And under that criteria, P3, the siting and scale of a dwelling must not cause unreasonable loss of amenity to adjoining properties having regards to visual impacts caused by the apparent scale. So I suppose my question ultimately is, how can something sit outside the building envelope, which is probably a guide to the scale, not necessarily the law? It can sit well outside the building envelope and have that visual impact, and yet that is not deemed as not complying.
The essential rationale is set out in the report. I think the important thing here is that, I mean, it's a fairly broad question, and in terms of the performance criteria for building envelope, one of the things that is important to understand is the context in which it operates and the impact of that. So the report outlines, the report outlines two things. We don't necessarily, as the planning department, agree with the diagrams as drawn. We've assessed the front setback as being compliant. So we believe that the discretion is in the side setback. So the side setback to Frederick Street, not to Stone Street. So that's one element. So I know in Councillor Kai's comments, there was an assumption that this was outside the building envelope on Stone Street. We don't believe that to be the case. We do believe it to be outside on the Frederick Street. Now, that's a relatively common thing in West Launceston because many of the blocks are deep and narrow, and lots of buildings, if you applied today's planning scheme on the buildings in the area, particularly on the slopes, they would be outside the side boundary, because as you go down the slope, the buildings get higher and the setback needs to be further. So a significant number of buildings in the West Launceston precinct would be outside the side boundary. So that's a relatively common, and that contributes to the level of amenity that you can reasonably expect. The issue here is that this proposal is not directly opposite a house. There's a road reserve of 20 odd metres between the houses, and the houses are generally orientated to face down the slope towards the view. They don't necessarily derive a lot of amenity out of their side windows. The one immediately opposite Frederick Street is closer to the side boundary, I would expect, and doesn't have significant windows and has a 1.8 metre high paling fence enclosing it on that boundary. So when you think about it contextually, the people on the opposite side of Frederick Street would be the most impacted. And I think if you go there and have a look, it's not reasonable to think that that they would be significantly impacted. So I think that's been material to our consideration.
Thank you, but of course these criteria aren't talking about necessarily the character of the neighbourhood, and I do accept that in that area there are properties that are closer to the boundary. There are properties that do, have a visual impact caused because it's on a slope and outside their building envelopes. But of course, they're properties that probably existed before there was a building envelope half the time. Yeah, before we're talking about an assessment we're doing today, not how these other houses got approved. So I suppose my question is, this seems to be the area where the most discretion is required, I suppose. This seems to be the area where someone could argue that the siting and the scale of this dwelling does indeed breach. Because it is now one title, it's not two titles, it has that added impact. One house on one title may well, be able to mostly fit within the building envelope, but 2 houses on one title, it's going to be very difficult to meet the building envelope for that site. Would that be a fair assessment?
Mr. Mayor, could the
I'm not-
planner use the microphone? We can't hear you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If you're online, I can't hear you.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
There was a lot of rhetoric early on. I don't know if I can repeat all of that.
Just the essential question.
The question essentially was, it must be more difficult when it's one title to fit 2 houses within the building envelope, essentially. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's entirely contextual. If you were looking at a title, fitting 1 house in it would be easier than fitting 2 houses on that title, but titles vary in size. And so a bigger title can easily, and the houses vary in size. So,
In this context, with this title, would be easier to fit 1 house than 2?
I don't really know how to answer that. Depending on the design, yes. If you had, it stands to reason that if you were trying to put 2 houses on a limited amount of time, it would be easier to put 1. But it shouldn't be implied that it's impossible to put 2.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Britton, a further question.
Thank you very much. A question, and then I'll just talk, if I may. Just for clarification, perhaps, I haven't given this enough thought for myself, but if we could just go to page 4 of the planning scheme assessment. There's a table there, and if I can just ask a question, the eastern primary frontage and the proposed setback does comply, is that right?
That's our assessment.
That's your okay, yeah. That's your assessment. Now, the western frontage does not comply only by 0.01 of a metre, is that right? Notwithstanding,
Yes.
Obviously, there's an area that it goes.
Yes,
okay, so,
in the table, that's right.
so it's only 0.01, and the southern frontage is that obviously doesn't. That's we're sort of missing a metre there. I'm reading all
That's
that
the
correctly?
metre. So that's the one essentially that triggers the performance.
Yep. Well, and to try and amalgamate a few things that I've heard today, I've actually lived up in that area for about 3.5 years. I love the area. I lived in Reserve Street. When you come to the building heights and things like that, they are massive slopes. You could bungee jump from the top of my house if you wanted to when I lived there. Amazing view, but it is just a part of that area. One interesting thing that I think about this development is it's not a 2-bedroom unit that someone's putting at the back of their block. It's not a 2-bedroom unit that someone's subdivided, and it's in and around somewhere. It is on the corner of a hill, and it's very prominent and it's very easy to look at, and therefore very easy to pick apart. I hear the representations, and I understand that area does have a lot of heritage value, whether or not that is written down or not. Partly, sometimes I think heritage can come into things. I mean, this council has done a lot of work and is doing a lot of work to update our heritage lists. I think we're doing the best we can, and at the moment, this has not been identified. Obviously, we're not taking into consideration, but I do think sometimes, and it's very subjective, but this does come up a lot. It's not on the register. Ultimately, we knocked this development back in December. They've brought it back. Yes, they've gone about it a different way. Yes, people might be able to look at it and go, that smells a bit, but ultimately it is well within the planning scheme. Part of our job is to make sure that we don't make a decision that is going to force us to go to TASCAT and subsequently lose. I think if this does go to TASCAT, we will lose. I understand. I'm sort of going to echo Councillor Harris's comments here. I know that this will definitely have a big impact on the visual amenity of the area. Huge, and there's no denying that. But ultimately, the building itself does fit. As I said, if it was in between 2 other buildings, you wouldn't even notice it. But the fact that it's right there on the corner the fact that they got the corner for the garden and they've now built something on it, don't get me wrong, I wish I could come up with a better word, but it smells a bit, but ultimately it fits. And we have a responsibility to act as a planning commission, and I will therefore be voting in favour of it today. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Britton. Further speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm sure we wouldn't be taking this long if it was an easy decision for anyone. So I don't think it patently doesn't fit the planning scheme without some reference to performance criteria. I think it's debatable whether it meets that performance criteria in certain areas that I have already pointed out. Look, I think anyone can imagine a building on this site that wouldn't have caused this much angst. As one suggestion in the representations was, why wasn't this step down the slope? Now that would, again, create a different style of building, and someone might object to that style of building. So, you know, it's one thing after another, really. But the plain truth as I see it, maybe it's not true, but as I see it, the plain truth is that it will have a visual impact in the area. I agree there are houses that stand as tall in the area, but they are houses that they are set back further from the boundary, or they are houses that sit within their own site and therefore more within their own building envelope. They are houses that were built before our particular iteration of the planning scheme existed. We're talking about this plan with this planning scheme. I admire the developer for their persistence with this and their ability to find solutions for this site, regardless of why the site was bought or the previous development application. That's all in the past. We're talking about this development in this particular site now. I can see that the efforts have been made to mitigate some of those impacts. The question for everyone around the table today is, have those efforts been enough? Especially in relation to 8.4.2, I think that is probably the only thing that you could argue, really, is in terms of that impact visually. It's unfortunate in its location, in the topography. You're driving up a hill, going past a corner site, not a site that's part of a longer block, but an exposed corner site, and you will see a 7-metre high building in that location. It will have a visual impact. Our only question that we have to ask ourselves is that acceptable or not? We have been recommended that it is acceptable. I'm in two minds about that. Any arguments about, we're going to see more of this, or development is good, we need housing. It's all superfluous in this situation. We're talking about this development in this site. I do think it flies very close to the wind, and I wish councillors luck in their decision.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Further speakers to the item? Deputy Mayor to close.
Thank you, and thanks for all of the commentary that's gone on before me again. It's been always interesting, and I think we only get the hard ones. We only get the ones that get objected to. The ones that aren't objected to go through and they get done, and 99% of them are in that case. I think a couple of things I just want to get back to. We just need to be careful when we start thinking that it doesn't meet the planning scheme, because an acceptable solution is based on, I think, a 400 square metre block on a flat bit of land. And that's why if we had everything there, we'd have lovely cookie cutter houses and look absolutely gorgeous around the city. The reason we have performance criteria is to enable people to look at it and be able to move within the boundaries of the acceptable solution to fit the topography or whatever of the land that we're looking at. In this particular case, it is prominent because it's on a hill. It's on a site, it's on a corner block. It's on a place where there was nothing before, and as a consequence of that, it'll stand out. There's no doubt that'll be the case. But we've got to keep going back and say, okay, well, and Councillor Walker said 8.4.2.1 or whatever it is in regards to the setbacks is probably the key issue. Now, we're talking about on the eastern primary front, which is the frontage of the block, 2.078 metres as opposed to 4.5, but I think the planners in their performance criteria have assessed that if you look along the Stone Street, most of the frontages are within the 2.5 or 2 metre. It goes 500 mil, the one next door. So therefore, it fits the criteria on that basis. The southern frontage is the other one, which is the down the street in Frederick Street, which is 2 metres versus 3 metres. The reason that the performance criteria work here is because it's overshadowing a street, not another building. And I think, as the officers said, most of the buildings are built close to their side boundaries anyway in that street. So therefore, it's not out of place with doing that. The issue is it's not overshadowing a habitable room. And I think, as the planners also have said, that most of the people have got their views at the front of the house, which look down the hill, not sideways into the hill. I do acknowledge the comments about the overshadowing the footpath and the amenity approach with all that. But the reality of it is, I think that it's purely because it's in a prominent position is the reason why we're having this conversation today, and everybody will see it. But does that mean we shouldn't approve it? I don't think it does, as much as I take into account the sale of the land and what they may have been thinking when they did it, and they've done very well, but the reality is it's been done. And we're now faced with a situation where we have to make a decision. In relation to the discretions within the planning scheme and the performance criteria that have been applied, I think this actually fits it. And it fits it quite well, and in many cases it's better than some of the ones we've approved previously because there's no house next door. So I think, unfortunately, and I do acknowledge the representors, and I've had lots of conversations with a couple of them, and I do accept the number of things out, but we are a planning scheme. Our role is as a planning scheme operator here today, and we need to make decisions based on how the planning scheme. We've had professional officers give us advice. We've challenged questions, done all that, and we need to get on and make the vote, and I think it's favourable.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Putting it to the vote. All of those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. (11.2). We have 64 Robin Street, Newstead. Planning scheme amendment. Add 64 Robin Street, Newstead as a local heritage place. Before we get to recommendation, do we have any public speakers to the item? There being none, we move to that recommendation, which is that Council agrees to and initiates amendment to add 64 Robin Street, Newstead local heritage listings, local heritage places. Create one new data sheet with appendix, local historic heritage code data sheet, and it adds 64 Robin Street, Newstead into the local heritage listing place overlay map. Somebody to move. Councillor Harris has moved. A seconder. Councillor Kai. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a brief question or two first, if I can. It's unusual that we're considering just one property for a local heritage listing. Is there any perhaps background that might be explained on that one?
Thank you, Councillor Harris.
Thank you. Yeah, look, it is a, I guess, relatively interesting application. It actually forms part of a former scheme amendment that is currently on advertising. So that's one we actually initiated and undertook ourselves, which has already identified the property as having significant cultural and heritage value. I guess there's nothing to stop the owner or an applicant to apply at the same time, noting the significance of the, or I should say the depth of the former amendment currently on advertising. That it could be possible that may take a few months or 6 to 12 months to actually get over the line, whereas a single title would most likely proceed just a bit quicker. So this will allow the owner to get it onto the register a bit more timely.
Thank you. And just to confirm, the owner has in fact requested this rather than us imposing it upon him.
That's correct.
Right.
Or her. Yes. Thank you. Yes, an interesting one because, as I said, it was part of a larger cohort of properties that we looked at, including the bus shelter just across the road from it. But if the owner is asking for us to support what we have already decided we should support, I see nothing for us to see here other than perhaps give our support on the individual thing. I struggle to see the reason why he would want to do it, other than he wants to make sure that at no point can it be removed. So he must really want to keep the building as it is. He or she must really want to keep the building as it is. So if that's what the building owner is wanting, and we are in agreement that it is in fact an historical listed property, then happy to support this motion today.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Councillor Kai is the seconder.
I think it's wonderful that the community recognise the importance of heritage value and have the initiative to speed up this process of getting their property listed as a local heritage place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kai. Further comments around the table, Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's simply a matter of this just wants to, the owner wants to accelerate the process so they can get on and do what they want to do with the building. And I think that's a very sensible thing for us to enable to happen.
Thank you. Anything further to add to the discussion around the table? Councillor Walker.
I just rise to commend the owner for pursuing that. Just reading in the agenda, if for anyone's interest there, the history of the building, the stone, foundation stone being laid in 1952. So this is a different type of heritage that some might be used to in Launceston in terms of our colonial European heritage. This is something far more recent. It has a different type of history, and while it might be unusual, it's excellent to see people wanting to expedite the process. Owners of a building who wish to recognise its value. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Anything further? Councillor Harris to close.
No, nothing further to add. Thank you.
Fantastic. To the vote then, all of those in favour? That's all councillors present. The motion is carried. Council no longer sits as planning authority. At agenda item number 12, we have announcements by the Mayor. They are published in the agenda, just with the taking out. I didn't make it to New Horizons last night. I had another appointment run a bit late, but I would have loved to have, but didn't make it there. 13, councillor reports. Any councillor reports? Starting with the Deputy Mayor.
I've had a good couple of weeks. My first part since our last meeting was to attend the Tasmanian dance sports up at the Silver Dome, and I thought it was absolutely wonderful. My wife and I had a lovely couple of hours there. We probably weren't staying for that length of time, and we kept on thinking, we'll go, no, we'll just watch one more. We'll just watch one more. So I'd just like to commend Councillor Palmer and the work that his team did to put that together. It was absolutely a stunning event, and I hope we have many more of it. So we might get our dancing shoes out, might go up with Councillor Razo. I think he'd be into that. Thursday, a week ago, I went to Hobart to represent the Consular Corps dinner in Hobart, which was all the consular representatives, and got a precursor from Saul Eslake about the state of the state that he was about to deliver to the government the next day. But the importance of doing that was something the Mayor and I did a few weeks ago, where the consular group came to Launceston, which they rarely do, was to really cement the relationships that we have with the various consuls for the various countries, because often when consular people come in, or people come from other countries to Tasmania, they'll go to their consul in the city that they're visiting, and that's Hobart, and the ability to get Launceston on the agenda to come and visit is something that doesn't actually readily happen. And the intent of the consular group was to say we need to actually broaden our horizons and come and visit Launceston. So this is just part and parcel of us keeping our name in front of it. And whilst I wasn't expecting to speak, they asked me to, so I did. And I'm not quite sure what I said, but I did say something, I hope, positive towards Launceston and what they could look for at the northern end of the state. I also officiate on behalf of the Mayor at the Vietnam Veterans Day service back on the 18th of the month. That's a fantastic event, and Councillor Palmer was there as well. I think it's great because I guess the Vietnam War veterans over the journey have not always been well regarded in the countries they came from, not only here but in other countries. And I think it's great that we actually, I won't celebrate, but commemorate their service to our country and what they did. And it's very sad, I spent an hour or so afterwards with a number of the veterans up at the RSL talking about various things, and they go back to Vietnam. Not many of them have, but you wouldn't know Australia had been there. Where the Americans were, everybody knows where they were. The Australians were there, and I think it was a hill which no longer exists. So it's sad the fact that we actually spent a lot of time and did a lot of work in Vietnam, that memory in Vietnam has actually been taken away. But I think it was great, and I certainly feel the love in the room for the people who are veterans, that service continues, and it actually does commemorate the significant sacrifices where they didn't have choices to go. They were conscripted to go out of a ballot. The ball came out of a ballot with your birth date on it. If you were lucky, you got to go. And some didn't come back. And, you know, they talked about Long Tan, which is really the day that we celebrate, and it was the actual 58th year to the day that the Long Tan battle was fought. So I think it's really important that we as a council, and I know that they're very appreciative of what we do as Launceston City Council to support that commemoration of what the service that they've done. So I think Elizabeth and the team do a fantastic job in putting all that together. So I was very pleased to deputise for you, Mayor, on that day, and got a lot out of it. On Monday, along with the Mayor and I think Councillor Palmer, Councillor McMahon was there, I think we celebrated 50 years of the legal aid, and what a wonderful institution that's been, and how it's served our community and those that need representation that may not be able to afford representation. So they've done a fantastic job over the many years that they do it, and we wish them well. And I thought the speech given by Kristen the other night was just fantastic about how she outlined what the purpose of this organisation is. And a couple of other things which are not rented, they're not really council things, but I had the pleasure of going to my grandson's book week and reading books at his centre this week. And the pleasure of those kids, and they get dressed up in everything. And I guess with the literacy stuff that we've got in this state, and probably more broadly this country, we need to have book week every week, I think, because the kids just absolutely absorb all of that and take it in. And I think that if we want to encourage kids to read and learn all these sorts of things, that I think, you know, things like book week are just so important to it. And I know Councillor Palmer's wife's working very hard on improving the education standards in the state, and I would sort of recommend that we might have book week every month, or at least celebrate it a bit more often than once a year, I think. And last night I attended the Laramie project, which was put on by Three Rivers Company, and I tell you what, if anybody has got a vacancy in their diary for the next 3 or 4 days, it's a 3-hour vigil, but it is worth it. There's two intermissions, and it's about a pretty serious, about a gay bashing in Laramie, Wyoming, back in 1998. Some fairly sensitive scenes in regards to it all, but a fantastic representation about community and people and how they react to tragedies such as that. So if you're looking for something to do which will really, I think, draw you in, I would seriously recommend you go and do it. And it's only on until the 24th, so you haven't got long to go.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I was the other person at the civic function representing the council, and 50 years of legal aid in Tasmania. My son now works for legal aid here in Launceston, and made me think about my mother's own journey in the 1960s when there was no legal aid, and how difficult that must have been for her in what was then a very male-dominated industry. So to celebrate 50 years, and it's interesting that nearly 80% of the lawyers now are female in legal aid, and only 20%, whereas the original cast were all male. The other thing I've been doing is very much to do with NTDC, the Northern Tasmanian Development Corporation. I attended their regional forum on Friday the 16th, where they brought together 12 different speakers over the best part of 5 hours, where members of the community, other councils, all gathered in the room to listen to them. They spoke about a number of different topics. I will just give you a couple of quick outtakes from them, some of which we're doing something about as well. One was the need for, or the opportunity for councils to look to partner with developers and Housing Tasmania and the federal government to develop medium density housing within our city. So that's interesting. It was the next item on our agenda just about. The second one is a bit more interesting, and that was about waste collection and how at the moment we levy simply a bin tax that, regardless of the volume, people are not necessarily encouraged to do what they can to recycle or reduce their waste because there is just a flat charge. I know we do collect that information of how much each bin weighs, and we need to probably be heading towards a volume or waste, or a volume collection charge that reflects the individual household's actual amount of dumping of waste. Otherwise, there's no financial incentive to enable people to reduce what they send off to landfill. And ultimately, throwing things in a hole in the ground is not the way of the future. We have to look at doing things like that. So that's something perhaps for the council officers to think about how that might be implemented, but also, first of all, understand what the data is, because I'm assured the data is actually connected, that each time your bin is picked up, it is actually weighed. Thirdly, there was an item about what council could do to reduce development fees to encourage greater use of recycled products in each development. That would be an interesting angle to perhaps have a development scheme fee that did require either a certain percentage to be recycled or a rebate if they did in fact use recycled materials rather than always using new. And the fourth one was about the transport industry, something we've heard a lot about, and the way that the current Tasmanian Freight Equalisation Scheme works or doesn't work, particularly for small outbound freight users. So that was something which, of course, has now been the subject of Tammy Tyrrell bringing a motion to the federal parliament. But lots to be learned from the NTDC. And then the Mayor and I and the CEO had lunch with the board on Tuesday as their once in 14-month check-in with how NTDC is performing and whether they are in fact meeting what we're asking of them. And I think my impression, and yours as well, I think, was that they're doing a pretty good job. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Further councillor reports? Councillor Palmer.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And I just want to stand to echo the Deputy's comments about Sunday, the 18th of August. I attended the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Day service at the Launceston Cenotaph, along with many state and federal representatives, and of course, lots of veterans. 523 Australians died during our nation's involvement in the war. One of the lucky ones to come home was Corporal Norman Alexander Brundle, my uncle, born on the 26th of the 2nd, 1949, passed away 25th of the 8th, 2020. One of the speakers on Sunday was Chaplain of Launceston Sub-Branch, Reverend Vic Hines. Vic spoke about a range of things, but one thing that stood out to me was for us to just say thank you. Thank you to our veterans. So I stand here today and every other day and say thank you very much to all our returned servicemen and women, lest we forget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Any further councillor reports? Okay, moving forward through to agenda item 14, which is questions by councillors. At 14.1, we don't have any that have been identified as a part of this agenda, but 14.2, we have councillors' questions without notice. Any councillor questions, starting with Councillor Walker?
Thank you, Mayor. My question is in regards to the community provision of a community store in Princess Square. Obviously, community members felt strongly enough about providing assistance to those doing it tough, to provide a community distribution point, a box in Princess Square. That was removed, free to the fridge, quite a few weeks ago now. But most recently they've done that again. What action did council take?
Thank you, Councillor Walker. General Manager, Community and Place Network.
So we have a few bits and pieces. So your question was about the fruit of the fridge, I think it's called, reappearing in Princess Square.
Yes, most recent iteration.
Yeah, so look, this is really tricky. Our aim is obviously to always work with community groups. There are a number of factors, given that it's being installed in a public space, that we need to take into consideration. One of them being that it's not a topple risk. If someone was to climb, a child, for example, on top of it, we wouldn't want it to fall on top of anyone. The other factors we have to consider is that things like the fence in there are heritage protected, so we can't be affixing anything to that fence. And then finally, we need to make sure it's vermin proof. So if we're not having rats and whatnot helping themselves to the pantry, which is not the intent, we've been quite strong in trying to reach out to the group that is arranging this, and to date we haven't received a positive reception to working together to do a fridge. Certainly the installation of the pantry in Civic Square from an officer perspective was about doing that in a way that is safe, supporting something that the community is clearly very passionate about, but doing it in a way that we can be assured won't cause any harm to anyone. And it is, by all intents purposes, performing well. The donations are leaving the pantry, which is a good sign, and I've seen a lot of people, myself included, placing things into the pantry for people in the community that might be doing tough.
So in essence, what is the difference between the council's trial in Civic Square and what was most recently placed in Princess Square?
It was installed by people with expertise in assuring it's fitted properly and doesn't present a safety risk to anyone. We're not entirely clear who or how the other pantry is being installed, and when we are seeing it reappear, it's still not satisfying that safety criteria.
And at the moment we have described what we've done in Civic Square as a trial. Would council operational staff consider locating boxes in additional places as a part of that trial?
I think that's certainly something worth considering, and I know that that was feedback from the Homelessness Advisory Committee as well.
Yes, because certainly, different locations, one would imagine, might achieve different results. So would council therefore be willing to work with the Frida Fridge people to have a second trial location at Princess Square?
We'd like to engage in dialogue with Frida the Free Fridge's parents, for lack of a better word, to see what may or may not be possible and what they're hoping to achieve, but there needs to be a dialogue for that to occur.
Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Kai.
Similar question to Councillor Walker. Down at Invermay at Russell Street, where the garden is, they also have a shed where they put bread or any type of other food that people no longer want in there. What's the difference between their shed or their bread shed to what was in Princess Square?
Thank you, Councillor Kai. I'd need more information about that one through the chair. I'm not personally aware of it. It doesn't mean that other officers aren't, but we can come back to you on that one. Did you say Russell Street? No? Street?
It's been there for a long time, so they've been there for, well, as far as I know, probably at least a couple of years. That down at Russell Street where they've got the garden. No. God, no.
Happy to discuss where it might be with you after.
There's heaps.
Well, I thought if
There's
they're...
heaps of them around. Oh. They're obviously not up to code, so now we're going to have to go and look at it. Cool. Thank you, Councillor Kai. Any further questions without notice from councillors? Now, Councillor Harris, there was a question that we might use this time to facilitate around the tree in UTAS Stadium. I believe you had a conversation with the CEO around further work that we might be looking at doing for potential feasibility or relocation. So I might, So CEO, the question time here is now, Deputy Mayor, if I may just sit to you to chair for a moment. A question without notice around the public's expression for the elm tree, which is located and has been identified to be removed as a part of a DA development for UTAS Stadium, and the further conversation that council is then going to have around that tree, that infrastructure itself.
Thank you, Mayor. And in responding to the question, we have received a development application to support the further development of UTAS Stadium. A part of that application is a specific request for the removal of a tree located. We have received a part of the public consultation, 2 responses to that public consultation. in response to the removal of the tree as required for the development application received. Whilst delegation does allow for officers to proceed with that application, we have made a decision, given the sensitive nature and the political nature surrounding the tree and the request of some of the councillors, we will present the matter to a workshop, and subsequently we will then present it to council for consideration. And in doing so, we have already asked our internal arborist to provide us an opinion. Whilst we appreciate it will be a preliminary opinion and not a fully detailed opinion around what it may or may not be able to do in terms of relocation. But I am aware, as part of the application submitted by the state government, that there is a report specifically for the tree and potential repurposing of the tree for the site. So further information will come to councillors first of all at a workshop, and then subsequently a decision will be required by the council.
Thank you, CEO. Councillor Harris, question.
Just a question. I'd be interested in understanding, when we sit to consider that item, if not only understanding the arborist's view of whether it's technically possible to relocate the elm tree, because it is a large elm tree, but I'd also like to understand the quantum of costs that could in fact be required to remove and relocate the elm tree, and I guess whether the elm tree could be relocated within the York Park precinct, or whether in fact we would look to relocate it somewhere else, which would only increase the level of cost, I'd imagine. Yeah, that was just something that I'd love to have before we make that decision, so costs as well.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. And I will speak just on correspondence that's come through to council and myself personally, that I would like to see that report and that decision does have a look at whether there is opportunity for feasibility study first initially around what relocating a tree of this significance might look like, if it's possible, how much it might then potentially cost, and what is involved in that process. Yeah, thank you. Any further questions without notice? Councillor Walker?
Just, I suppose, a point of order in regards to that. We have a DA that is live, and I suppose that removal of that, it is for the removal of that tree to test whether that is possible. The discussion around whether that indeed should take place or not hasn't happened, although we are now already discussing that it may. We are preempting that it will, or that potentially it will. I suppose just a point of order in terms of it being a live DA and already making some predetermination that we'll have to do something in order to remove it when we're not even sure if it's the will of the council that it should be moved.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. I think, just ruling on your point of order, that this is being proactive and ensuring that council has all of the information before making that decision would be really important. This is very time sensitive, particularly for the tree, understanding that once spring comes, the likelihood of that tree and its ability to be moved and to flourish again really does restrict the timing. So yes, no, in terms of where we are in that conversation, I think this is a great proactive point. It's in no way determining that this tree will be removed. That decision will come to council. As CEO mentioned, there was possibility for this to be delegated. I think it's a really great step forward for this council to be proactive and say, we want to discuss this, and to discuss that, we need to have all of the facts. And I would love to, as Councillor Harris also said, ensure that we have an understanding financially, feasibility around what that might look like if it was to occur, not stating that it will occur for sure. Thank you. Further questions without notice? Okay, we'll move forward through to notices of motion at 15. 15.1 is a notice of motion to increase housing diversity in the municipality. And Deputy Mayor, I might hand the chair to you just for a moment, as I would like to move this item. I would like to move that motion, please, Deputy Mayor. Great. Okay, as the mover, just a couple of points that I would like to emphasise around this notice of motion. I think it's something that this community has been calling for, this community has been speaking about, and the way in which this council has been very proactive in the space of conversing that this is the amended version, which is, and I'll state here, that council explores an opportunity to increase... Yes. Thanks for the clarification on that. that council explores an opportunity to increase housing diversity in the municipality by investigating the use of CBD or inner city land holdings for the development of community housing, as well as retaining public car parking facilities. Engage a registered community housing provider or a private developer with demonstrable experience partnering with the community housing sector following due process to devise plans to the identified site or sites that result in an affordable housing at a high density in line with desirable heights of the CBD, and support the proponent to apply for funding in a future round of the federal government's Housing Australia Future Fund to develop the site for affordable housing. On affordable housing, I think it's really important to note. Thank you. It's important to note that affordable housing, this motion is not designed at targeting so much social housing, but it is affordable housing, which is where you provide residential accommodation below market rental prices. The residential accommodation is rented to people whose household income is not high enough to cover market rental price in the area that they live or work. These people could be, as examples, musicians, people working in hospitality, uni students, older people, etc. The market at the moment, it cannot support density for large-scale private apartments because the sale price would not be high enough to cover costs for that development. Affordable housing is about supporting everyone at different stages of their life property cycle, and it is described in the presentation that we've just been through. It's just really important to understand that this notice of motion, whilst it has the ability to pull in private sectors, is purely to develop throughout this housing fund that is currently proposed by the federal government. This is an opportunity for our council to get on the forefront, to be leaders in this sector, as many other councils are doing, as Councillor Palmer and Councillor Gibson and I were fortunate enough to see through the Housing Summit that was spoken about at the Canberra conference, and for myself to see in Adelaide in this week just gone. There are councils that are moving in these spaces at the moment. We talk about inner city living, we talk about antisocial behaviour, we talk about the vibrancy that our CBD is so vocally spoken about for our community. Bringing people into the city is a vital part of what we're seeing going forward, and looking at really being able to use that federal government Housing Australia Fund as an opportunity to not have it just purely based on our municipality and our ratepayers, but a really great opportunity, a proactive opportunity for us to step forward with the federal government and to supply desperately needed inner city living. And again, affordable houses. Those who are currently not able to get into the housing sector, they can't find a place to live and they can't quite afford what the private rental sectors are providing at the moment. I'm really passionate about this, and I really appreciate the further conversations that have been had prior to this notice of motion today. And I look forward to moving forward proactively with the private sector, with the federal government, however this looks like. And I look forward to having the support of the council table today. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mayor. Seconder, Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, the motion as amended, it has been expanded beyond the CBD and car parks to look at other council land holdings, which is an important change. It's interesting to note that Launceston's inner city no longer has a state government primary school within reasonable distance of where we stand today. It's interesting that the closest primary school would in fact be East Launceston, about 1.7 kilometres, but it's up and down 2 hills to get to it. It would take you nearly 29 minutes according to Google. The Glendew Primary School is 2.2 kilometres and 32-minute walk, and Invermay Primary School is 2.3 kilometres and 32 minutes walk, because it's a bit flatter. So we have to open our eyes to what the opportunities are to our land holdings beyond what they can be. Affordable housing is a very important part of that mix. It is, in general terms, where someone has a job, and people that are identified include professions such as nurses, police, cleaners, all of which, as part of that need to have their housing, and having it close by, particularly to the hospital, makes a lot of sense. So to me, I think this is a good motion for us to investigate, but it's also for us to understand whether this suits what we as a council want to do, what the opportunities are with or without a private developer, and how much of the federal government funding we can help assist in Launceston. I have my own opinion about what affordable housing should be funded by, and that probably involves using superannuation funds to become landlords in much the same way that the state government is. But that's not for this particular motion. This is in fact about accessing what the federal government is putting forward. And if we find a suitable developer and or CHP provider, then we can create what is known as a special purpose vehicle, an SPV, because we love acronyms, to then apply for funding under the National Australia Future Fund or the NAFF. So this is just the start of a project. It will be interesting to get the feedback from the council staff as quickly as possible. Currently, the first round of the National Australia Future Fund is being assessed and is due to be, the results of that assessment, which closed in March as far as applications go, are due to be released by the end of Q3, which is only the end of next month, the end of September. I'm not sure if there was any from Launceston, which might have purely been developer driven. I don't think there were any that were submitted with council buy-in, but the money, as the Mayor has said, is there, and we should be aware of the opportunities that that may offer as city. So happy to support the motion in that, and I look forward to see what our councillors, council staff bring back to us, and also to engage particularly with the local developers, because I think for many of them the opportunity to be part of this should not be overlooked, and they could see the opportunity to make a real difference in their city, to make it where we do have some medium density housing, which currently is the missing middle as it is throughout Australia. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor, and I stand to fully support this motion by our Mayor. It's an outstanding motion. It means more people in our city, more people shopping in our local businesses, more people in our cafes, more people in our restaurants, more people activating our nighttime economy, more people closer to services, potentially less cars and traffic in our city roads. It will minimise effect on our natural habitats and our natural environments, and it will be an excellent outcome for our CBD. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Palmer. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. Thanks, Mayor, for bringing this motion to the table. It is entirely appropriate for us to be proactive at this time, and this is why we go to national summits. This is why we send representatives to be able to be a part of that collective, passionate, inspired conversation and find out what opportunities are available to us. So there's been many times we've touched on this concept, this term of council, but this is the first time we're going to be able to make that first step into realising that. Clearly this Labor federal government has got some real skin in the game when it comes to funding these projects, and we cannot let this moment pass us by. We've already identified that the Launceston Centre is a perfect place for taller buildings. No, bottom of the valley, it's entirely appropriate that that's where we build taller buildings. We discussed how car parking might work with that. Do we expect every apartment or every unit to have car parking available? We need to make sure we're ahead of this kind of conversation. We don't want to be let down by people expecting to have what you might have in an urban environment in the middle of our city. I think it's important that we touch on the clean air strategy here as well. If we want people to be living in the middle of our city, we've got to make sure we've got clean air for them to breathe and look out their windows. At the moment, we haven't really made much headwind when it comes to the clean air strategy, but I think it kind of is hand in hand with inner city living. I also think making sure that we've got that connectivity of the city so people can move freely. Touching on what Councillor Palmer said, it's a perfect opportunity to test some of these ideas that we've been talking about for 10 years, 12 years now. We know the Girl Report still stands. This is a perfectly livable inner city, and it's time we tested it. Let's get moving on this now, and we hope to see a report very soon back to Council.
Thanks, Councillor Dawkins. Councillor Walker.
It is a very livable city, and to pick up from that point, and it's a city that we should all be, very proud of. But it is a city that can't currently provide all the types of housing that we require. We don't have many examples of alternative housing models in Launceston. You see them in other parts of the world, in other parts of Australia, even in other parts of Tasmania. But this motion takes a step forward towards council playing some part in that. Inner city living, medium density housing is not something that's been attractive for developers, obviously for financial reasons. Otherwise it would be being done. I suppose you could argue the university's taken steps in that direction, close to the city. So I stand to commend the Mayor for this motion. I will say, as Chair of the Homelessness Committee, I have long agitated this year for Council to take advantage of current arrangements with the federal government via the state government to access capital money for these purposes. It could be for different cohorts of people. It could be for people who require social housing that we could access this money. It could be for affordable housing, as this motion is. It could be for certain demographics within our society. But in this case, we are not providing the market, for whatever reason, the developers and owners are not providing the market with the quantity that is required in this particular area in terms of affordable housing. So in a sense, it's a type of market intervention on behalf of governments. And this is something that the federal government has obviously seen as necessary, something that we did in the past with Commonwealth housing companies and the like. And it's something that's proactive. Similarly, and this does wrap into this motion today because we have to be market interventionists in the CBD. There was a time when it was the traders, the entrepreneurs, the mercantile part of our city that drove the CBD. Council didn't have to do a lot. Didn't even have to build a mall for the city to be busy. Those times have changed. Now is time for council to be proactive in that area as well, to reignite the CBD, as a previous speaker has mentioned. And that is why I particularly like this motion and where it's directing itself. Look, I think we could do similar things in other urban centres in Launceston, in Kings Meadows or Mowbray. But one step at a time. We have to walk before we can run. But this is our time and this is our city. And this will be part of our future. So I commend the motion to the table. And while we can't act with all haste, let's hope that this is something that comes to fruition sooner rather than later. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Councillor Raza.
Thank you. I stand here to support this motion. But most importantly, I feel so proud about this council that over the last 2 years, how it has become more engaged and active in trying to address the housing issue in our region. Probably you recognize as well that significant number of people become experiencing homelessness is because unaffordable houses and high rents. Just to give you an example, just for the last 2-3 years, how much rent has increased. It used to be medium rent for 311, now like 450. And probably we have seen some young people have become homeless because of that. And I'm glad about our council, how trying to collaborate with the state governments, in which they put like more than $1 billion, and the federal government about $9 billion to address the issue of housing. Housing, it might take a few years, unfortunately. It's not going to happen overnight. And sometimes I wonder, what else can we do to address, to have immediate solution to the housing problem and unaffordable rents. You look at some of the statistics about empty houses in Tasmania. More than 1,000 houses in Tasmania that are empty. According to 2022, at least 256 houses in Launceston empty. So if you look at it, there are actually houses available, but I like how, as the council, the state and federal, all are working together to address the issue of housing, how the community should be on board as well. That all these empty houses, perhaps some of them might help in addressing the issue, make them available for people. I'll tell you some positive news. One of the issues of a problem with housing is that we get more people with experiencing homelessness. And I remember 2 years ago when my first contact with them was in King's Wharf. And at that time there were 5 people, living in the derelict tents. And then 6 months ago, that number increased to about 13 between caravan and tents. So I went this morning to go and see what happened, and I was so pleased to see there were only 3 or 4. So what I'm saying is seeing that Launceston in general, with the help of all these non-profit organizations, are working so hard to address these issues of homelessness. And I feel there is hope now that with the whole community be on board as well to do something about the issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Isaac. Councillor Britton.
Thank you very much. Only quickly, I just, having worked with a lot of young people and only in the last few years getting myself out of the rental market, I know a lot of people who wouldn't have enough furniture to fill up their living room, taking up a 4-bedroom house, and keeping that away from a family or someone else who could move in there. I think this is going to be a good opportunity for, I know we mentioned some occupations, but if you leave them out, we've got young singles, uni students, people going to TAFE, people who are doing their apprenticeships, inner city living. It opens up for those people to be able to, again, have that affordable living, which they currently don't. And all I was going to say was let's hope the late night chef doesn't come home and practice his drums in the apartment. Cheers.
Thanks, Councillor Britton. Any other speakers? Back to you, Mayor, for closing.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And just to be clear with the motion as well, that this is the amended motion, how we're looking at identifying sites. It's not just predominantly one site, so devise plans for the identified sites as a part of this. I'll only finish with a bit of a paraphrased quote from the Lord Mayor at the summit last week. A house used to be a place to park a car and raise a family. Now it's a place to park your wealth and raise your asset portfolio. So it's a fantastic opportunity for us to jump into this space. I very much appreciate the comments that have come around the table, and I look forward to working with the federal government or private developers or both in really generating some fantastic outcomes for our city, our CBD and our greater region of Launceston.
Thanks, Mayor. I think I know how the vote's going to go, but all those in favour? That's all councillors present. Back to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you, councillors. We now have at 16 committee reports. We have 16.1 the Transport Committee meeting. With the recommendation that Council receives the report from the Transport Committee, which was held on Thursday, the 25th of July. Moved by Councillor Harris, seconded by Councillor Walker. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, the Transport Committee meeting is there. It was interesting, we had Rochelle Harwood, one of the committee members. She's from the Tasmanian Transport Association, the Tasmanian Logistics Committee, give us a presentation on the importance and the issues that are facing that industry. Many of the industry are ageing, and in fact the average age of their truck drivers is between 56 and 57 years of age. And there are in fact 23,000 heavy trucks that traverse our roads in Tasmania, but there are in fact 68,000 licences for heavy rigid users. So it is a big part of our economy, and they do move an awful lot of the goods that we may be accessing or buying, regardless of how we actually purchase them, whether we purchase them down the road or whether we purchase them on the internet. They still have got to be delivered, and it is the transport industry that delivers it. We talked a bit about the mental health issues, including truck stop health checks and the workplace health and safety issues for the transport workers. But that was just something that I felt was a very interesting presentation to us that I'd wanted to pass on to everyone listening. We also had some learnings from one of the council officers, Nigel, who went on his holiday to take in an active Leicester seminar while he was there, at no cost to the council, but brought back some of the learnings from that, which was a great effort, and thank you to Nigel for that. We also saw the opportunity, the first stages of how to connect the suburb of St Leonards via an active transport corridor, and some of the challenges, but also some of the options that are starting to be investigated by the council so that they are getting on the front foot. We have seen, obviously, the master planning of St Leonards being approved last meeting, and this goes hand in hand with that, is to have that active transport connection so that St Leonards can get into our CBD. We also looked at some new grants that we've been successful in getting around the city, but also, most importantly, the Invermay Road and Lindsay Street intersection, which is currently a roundabout, and its signalisation to create traffic signals on that and what its design will look like and how it will in fact work in tandem with the other traffic signals in the area to make sure that the traffic does flow and doesn't just get through one and have to stop again immediately at another one. So a very interesting Transport Committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Walker is the seconder.
As a councillor who's not on the Transport Committee, I don't really have much to say, thank you, Mayor, but I do note with interest that there was discussion of heavy vehicle driver rest areas, something that's becoming more prolific around Tasmania as the state government roll them out, some contention over some of the locations, and I certainly think it is precedent of this council, when there is one proposed within our vicinity, to maintain an active watch in that regard. Of course, an important part of our road system, truck drivers, and the need for those rest areas, but they do need to include rest facilities. I think if you travel in other parts of Australia, you'll find that they are far more than just a bitumen lane on the side of the road in order for a truck to pull over, but indeed that they provide a space for various amenities, let's say. Yes. So interesting to see that, and great work to the committee.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Any further comments around the table? Anything further to close? Okay. Putting it to the vote then to accept the report. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried. At 17, Community and Place Network. 17.1 is the 213 to 215 and 217 to 229 Wellington Street. Request to waive planning fees. Now, we do have an alternate motion, I believe, here, Deputy Mayor.
I'd like to move an alternate motion, and the alternate motion reads as follows.
Right.
That Council determines to apply a 50% discount to the development fee for each of the three proposed separate applications for the development, and use the Launceston Private Hospital at 20, and use of the Launceston Private Hospital at 213 to 215 and 217 to 229 Wellington Street, Launceston. This discount does not apply to fees required for development advertising or planning scheme amendments that may also be necessary.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Somebody to move the alternate motion.
Yeah, I'm moving.
Oh, sorry, second.
I'm moving the alternate.
Seconded by Councillor Harris. Yep, sorry. Okay, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much. And I want to acknowledge the responses made by our council officers, which I think are appropriate in regards to the non-waiving of the fees and the precedents that might be set as associated with that. And I think they give good explanation as to why we shouldn't be doing what we're about to do today. And I'm not going against their good advice on the basis that I don't agree with in general what they're trying to achieve with what they've told us, and I think it's good governance and good practice for them to probably tell us that. The reason why I've moved to put an alternate motion today is simply on the basis of just rolling through the facts of this particular case, and I think that's the most important thing, is that each case needs to be looked at in its own individual set of facts and not necessarily a set of precedent for the next thing that goes forward. I think for those that have been down the journey of the private hospital, we did have a private hospital that was going to be relocated next to the general hospital by another group who a few months before a few weeks probably before the state election, they pulled out of that. So we were left with no private public hospital alternative, even though the site had been cleared for that to occur. The developer or the applicant for today's waiver of fees then stepped in, and I had a number of conversations with him and others in regard to the whole health precinct down there, and said, is there something that we might be able to do? And this is a person who's been developing lots of spaces in regards to health activity in and around that precinct for a number of years, and increasing and improving the offering where the offering is challenging in lots of spaces. So I don't really want to take away from the fact that this is a private development and a private outcome that will come to it, but I think one of the important aspects of the conglomeration of the private-public, it meant that the private could act as a private when it needed to overflow private patients out of the public system to enable more spaces for public patients to be in there, and also just offered alternatives with doctors who were working in both spaces could move seamlessly between both places as well to add additional content to those places that might need them. So I think, as was spoken at the last meeting by the proponent, health is an extremely important part of this city. Health is an extremely important part of this state. Health is a very important part of this country. Health is a very important part of this world. And it is always a contested space in trying to get the best outcomes that we can get for our community. In what the proponent has put forward, they're offering a solution which is actually going to hopefully improve the health outcomes for our city. So that in itself, I think, is something that we as a noble outcome should be aspiring to assist in. And whilst this is a private development and there will be private outcomes that will be beneficial to the proponent, I think the other thing that sets this aside is the fact that this could be done in one development application, but if it was, it would need to wait for a period of time for a planning scheme amendment to occur, as a consequence of that deferring the start date on this particular proposal. What the proponent is endeavouring to do is to actually get the site started on areas where there is no planning scheme amendment to be done while the planning scheme amendment's out there. So to me, all he's doing is trying to activate sooner rather than later, and I think the fact that they'll start spending their hard-earned money on developing stage 1 and stage 2 suggests that stage 3 is more likely. Whereas if we sit there and we don't know what the outcome of the planning scheme amendment will look like, we hope it will be favourable to enable that to be done, but at least stages 1 and 2 will be well developed and there'll still be some additional capacity that will actually be achieved from it. So by giving a dispensation of 50% of the fees, which is not what was asked for, he was asking for one fee for the 3, which would have been about $37,500 rather than about $47,500. The reason for 50% is simply that even though this is a 3-part situation, which is probably something he'd prefer to do in one, the reality of it is our officers are going to still need to spend time and effort in regard to each of those proposals to deal with it, which will be more than, if you like, in relation to dealing with just one proposal. So I think that the 50% discount gives us an appropriate number to say, okay, well, we understand exactly what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve. It's our ability to assist with a good health outcome for the city. And hopefully it doesn't set a precedent, or I don't believe it sets a precedent in relation to a future development of any site that might come back to deal with us, because we'll look at that on its merits and the reasons why it might be seeking such an approval. So I put this to the table and hope that people will see fit to support it.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Harris is the seconder.
Thank you, Mayor. And the Deputy Mayor has gone through most of the points that I wanted to raise, but I think it is really important that this does not necessarily set a precedent unless any future developer comes to us with a very large dollar figure on his project that also happens to have 2 or 3 pieces of land that have different zoning and planning schemes that will in fact delay them being able to commence work. And that's the important thing here. We want to see the work commenced, whilst he has to then go off to get the planning changes to allow the final part to be completed. He couldn't have anticipated that the other proponent would have pulled out, as the Deputy Mayor said, for the city, and we should be thankful for the fact that they were able to step in. I'm sure there is plenty of opportunity as a private hospital for him to make some good money out of all this, but we do need to get it moving forward. Having a private hospital environment enables Launceston to attract not only doctors, but also the specialists and things like that that operate in the hospital in both the public and the private sphere. So having a good private hospital system working in the city is very important. So happy to support the 50% discount on the 3 fees today.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. I'm just going to jump in for a second just around, it's been mentioned a couple of times, the sector has not had a private hospital being pulled out. It just is not going to that site now. I just want to be very clear. In my meetings with that provider, they've been very clear to me that they're not pulling out of the sector. They've just pulled out of going into that site. So just for clarity, we're not saying that anybody's not providing those facilities. Cool. Councillor Walker.
I wasn't going to say that either. Yeah, look, I think this is an eminently sensible resolution to this issue, and I thank the mover for the motion, the alternate motion. I don't think it sets a precedent in any shape or form, and I do take note of the council officer's remarks in regards to a precedent. And I think by making a 50% in this case discount rather than a waiver, it does put the decision-making back to council, as we're doing now. It does perhaps create a precedent insofar as council could in future elect to give a discount to another developer for another reason. But let's just look at health for a minute. I mean, once upon a time, this was largely the purview of governments, state and federal especially. You will know that there are some local councils in Tasmania who help to provide doctors' surgeries because they don't have one in their vicinity. This is something that, you know, no matter which side of the political fence you happen to stand or sit, there is a move towards private health as part of solutions in our community. And this will provide alleviation down the line in terms of beds available, in terms of services available. And I know we do have a fellow councillor who's a doctor nodding in agreement, so I'll be most interested if anyone is a medical person here, if they can contribute in that regard. But no, you know, so it does make sense that council should look kindly and fondly upon this process and make our contribution, especially given the fact that we find ourselves in this, you know, usually probably unusual situation of one development straddling 2 different zonings. But having said all that, I don't believe it is creating any type of precedent, and it might be the choice of a future council that in exactly the same situation they make a different decision, and that is absolutely fine as well. We have ongoing development, $500 million worth slowly being put into Launceston General Hospital. There's going to be quite a few development applications in relation to that in the near future for this council. I think it is extremely pertinent for this council to keep an eye on those developments, because there's an aspect by which they will have an impact in their surrounding areas, the surrounding roads. There's an aspect in which there is piecemeal development because of that. It's not an easy site by any means, whether it is this particular site on Wellington Street or indeed all around that block. But if this in some way expedites that development, I shall be supporting it today. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Any further comments around the table? To close, Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, everybody, for the comments that are made, and I do apologise for the comments in regards to the previous proponent. I am aware they are continuing with their hospital activity, so that's a very appropriate admonishment, so I'll take that. Anyway, I think that the matter before us is fairly straightforward. We either agree or we don't.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Putting it to the vote then. All of those in favour? That's all councillors present. The motion is carried. At 18, we have no Creative Arts and Culture Services Network items for this agenda, but at 19, we have Infrastructure and Assets Network. 19.1, the Albert Hall project update and booking arrangements. I'm just going to head to the CEO for some clarification on some of the wording on this one for us.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just for councillors' benefit, I've just been recently advised that there is a amendment to be made within the report on page 62 under the heading Budget and Financial Implications. It currently states $6,000 quarterly. That should be $6,000 monthly.
Thank you, CEO. So noting that change, I'll get to the recommendation, which is that Council notes the progress under the Albert Hall project included in the report and sets the fees as attached to this agenda item for the financial year ending 30th of June 2025 and authorises the CEO to enter into a contract with Theatre North, if required, to provide a booking service from October 24 until an operational contract is negotiated or executed.
I might just declare a conflict of interest. Whilst I am the council representative on the Theatre North board, it is relating to the Theatre North board and I should step out.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just in case. Noting the Deputy Mayor's absence from the room, somebody to move. Councillor Harris, a seconder. Councillor Dawkins. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, the Albert Hall and the progress is pleasing to see as I rode past there this morning. And obviously we need to start taking bookings for it. And we have a specialist company, if you like, or arm's length company from our council in Theatre North, who, once we commence the work in Princess Theatre, will then perhaps have a lot less work to do. So this is a logical progression to enable Theatre North to not only continue to operate at Princess Theatre, but also to start taking forward bookings into the Albert Hall precinct, into the Albert Hall project itself, I should say, because ultimately their work will somewhat dry up once the Princess Theatre work commences. And it gives us, interestingly, the opportunity to then fully understand how much work is involved with the Albert Hall and whether, in fact, it is something that we should be in the future having two different booking agents looking after, one the Albert Hall, the other one the Princess Theatre, or whether, in fact, it can be done by one booking agent in Theatre North. So I think this is a sensible move. There is some cost to it, as you mentioned. There is some cost that will be incurred by the council in doing so. I think in keeping those staff at Theatre North gainfully employed will mean that they will be there once we finish our work at Princess Theatre, and certainly then that will be a very busy area once all those works have been carried out. So I'm very happy to move today to have this motion for us to do this put to the council and hopefully for the councillors who are left to support it.
Yes, we still have quorum, which is good. Thank you. Councillor Dawkins is the seconder.
Thank you. Only to say that Theatre North has a talented skills-based board and operational professionals with demonstrated capacity to be able to manage this booking system, and we should entirely enter this contract with them to deliver this project.
Thank you, Councillor Dawkins. Any further comments around the table? Anything to close, Councillor Harris? Great. Putting it to the vote then. All of those in favour? It's all councillors present. The motion is carried. Organisational Services Network at 20. 20.1 is fees and charges 24-25. Recommendation here is that council approves the fees which will change the previously adopted fees and charges for 24-25 as listed in the agenda. Somebody to move. Councillor Harris, seconded by Councillor Britton. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, a couple of items, I believe a couple might have been missed out. Some are just an increase. We have a $2 increase for an overnight parking fee in both East and West Patterson Street car parks, and a $50 fee should you park in there after hours, and you then require an after hours let out, which still requires the security people to attend, I believe. At Launceston Aquatic, we have $21.65, which is just rounded up to the nearest 5 cents from an increase for a single visit into the health and fitness, $194.85 for the 10 pass health and fitness, and $155 should you be on a concession, which I believe were they overlooked at the last one, or is it just a regular time to do the increase this time of the year?
No, the only reason that they are in there too is because we've changed that single visit fee, so it's just bringing it in line with that.
Yeah, so that's what needed to be picked up. So happy to move these small changes.
Great, thanks, Councillor Harris. Councillor Britton, anything further? Excellent. Any comments around the table? Anything to close? Okay, putting it to the vote then. All those in favour? All councillors present, the motion is carried. At 20.2, we have consultation on draft amendments to the Local Government Regulations 2015 and draft Local Government Code of Conduct Order. Recommendation is that Council notes the correspondence from the Honourable Nick Street MP, Minister for Local Government, which explains proposed amendments to the Local Government General Regulations and also a new Local Government Code of Conduct Order. And it also requests that the CEO provides feedback by email to the Office of Local Government, indicating the City of Launceston's support for the proposed amendments. Somebody to move. Deputy Mayor to move. Seconded by Councillor Britton. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. And again, I'm largely supportive of everything that's in the decision making. I just wanted to be certain, particularly in regards to item 2.2, 14, motion working vulnerable people card eligibility criteria for council nominees, that LGAT request the state governments legislate the eligibility for nominations councillors require a person to hold a working with vulnerable persons card. Whilst I think in large sense, I think we sentimentally agree with it. I think there are some processes in regards to that particular card.
You've just gone a
I've
little bit ahead,
sorry, my
Deputy
apologies.
Mayor.
Oh, my apologies.
That's the LGAT voting.
I don't want to speak at all.
So this one's for the reform that's been sent through and the reporting and the draft amendments for that. That's okay. So, Councillor Britton?
Look, nothing further to add. I'm in acceptance of everything. Thank you.
Sure. Any other comments around the table? But I think that with the recommendation, particularly in part 2 of the motion, that this is the opportunity to speak to the CEO, speak to your fellow colleagues, your fellow councillors around any feedback that you have, collating that, and then the CEO will send off. Now, CEO, do we have a time frame of when this is required?
Through the Chair, I have to find out the exact date, but sooner the better. If members have any feedback, I'm happy to take it. I'd probably encourage you to do it by Monday. Close of business would be best.
Well, let's even expedite that. Let's make it tomorrow.
Even better.
Let's make it by end of today, end of this week. Cool. Okay, so have a look through that, but we're just thanking them and noting that it's been received. So yeah, by end of tomorrow. Cool. Okay, so nothing to close, Deputy Mayor. We'll make those comments offline. All those in favour? It's all councillors present. The motion is carried. Uh, 20.3, Local Government Association of Tasmania voting directions for general meeting, which will be held on the 4th of September. Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Harris. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I'll just repeat the comments I started making on the previous item. I do apologise for that. But I just did want to make the comment regarding the requirement for councillors to have a working with vulnerable persons card, in that whilst I think the theory of it is very good in regards to sort of improving the diligence about the people who do stand for local government. We did have some conversations offline that just because you've done one misdemeanor which may not enable you to get there many, many years ago, should that be preclusive of that? And also the back-end processes in relation to how things are dealt with regards to the vulnerable persons card is not something that I'm yet convinced is as good as it could be, and I wouldn't be supporting us doing that until they fix that back of house stuff or information.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Harris is the second.
Nothing new to add to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments around the table? Councillor Britton?
Thank you. I'd just like to echo the comments of the Deputy Mayor. I don't believe, whilst I agree in principle with background checks and making sure we've got the right people standing here, I do believe there's a lot of things that someone can do that don't hold any relevance in this space that would stop them from being able to apply and being able to be here in local government if indeed the working with vulnerable people's card was a necessity. So, yeah, I agree with it in principle. It might be a little bit of a controversial thing to say. However, I don't think we should be putting more barriers in place just for the sake of having barriers. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Britton. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, look, there's always some things in here that are contentious. There's roaming wild sheep up in Devonport,
Pigs.
apparently.
Pigs.
Oh, sorry, not sheep, pigs. Pigs. Obviously doesn't affect us as much. But
Yeah, that's right.
but I was going to say, like from Circular Head, they've got a motion there that which we conditionally support, which I suppose is asking that that local councils be able to define their own substantial commencement of work in the context of planning permits. When someone does receive a planning permit, sometimes a condition is if they haven't commenced by a certain time that could be revoked or certainly not extended. And this, I suppose, is an interesting one because it in some ways flies in the face of working collectively. They seem to be asking, no, well, council should be able to define it themselves. And I note in our conditional support, we make that point. So it is an interesting, toing and froing sometimes, I suppose, between what we want collectively as a group of councils and, what councils may wish to have individually within their control. That particular one, we want consistency more than anything else, just so everyone knows where they stand. But I just thought I'd point that one out because, yeah, we've headed to a statewide planning scheme. You would think that the rules should be consistent statewide. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Further comments around the voting positions? Deputy Mayor to close. Nothing further? Okay, putting it to the vote then. All those in favour? That's all councillors present. The motion is carried. As a part of this agenda, we have nothing identified for item 21, 22, 23. So meeting closed at 3:13, with the next meeting to be held here on the 5th of September.